The father of lies, the lame devil, the nobleman who caught the trends of his time better than most of his contemporaries, the person who didn't betray or sell only his own mother and only because there were no buyers. Charles-Maurice de Talleyrand. Talleyrand was born in Paris in an aristocratic family which, though ancient and illustrious, was not particularly prosperous. His father, Count Charles-Daniel de Talleyrand-Périgord, was 20 years of age when Charles was born. His mother was Alexandrine de Damas d'Antigny. From childhood, Talleyrand walked with a limp. In his memoirs, he linked this infirmity to an accident at age 4, when his parents didn't give a damn about him, and the first 4 years of his life he spent in the middle of nowhere at the vet nurse, who didn't care about him so much that one day she managed to forget the child on the dresser where she put him, and he took a terrible spill. But recent research has shown that his limp was in fact congenital. In any case, his handicap made him unable to follow his father's military career, leaving him the only obvious choice, a career in the church. 6 years of college, 15 years of seminary, and finally, at the age of 21, becoming an adult, our hero began to indulge mainly in revelry and debauchery. But the fun did not last long, since in 1779 he was ordained a priest. From this moment, Talleyrand will look for benefits in everything that surrounds him. This partly explains the sharp career growth. From a priest to the vicar of Reims, then the chief treasurer of the French church at the court, and in 1788 Talleyrand became Bishop of Autun by appointment directly from Louis XVI. Knowing most of the influential women in Paris very closely, he was aware of all things which were happening, which allowed him to easily engage in blackmail, insider trading and gambling. Occupying a high post in the church hierarchy and having many acquaintances at court, he regularly helped someone for certain services to take this or that position. However, gambling and bribes required large sums of money, and unfortunately Talleyrand did not have a permanent source of income. 1789 Revolution. Talleyrand attending the Estates General, representing the clergy at the First Estate. In Estates General, where all the main nobles, priests and bourgeois have gathered to address such important questions as: should we live in a monarchy? Do we need a constitution? What is the sense of life? Why are we so fond of onions? Etc. The royal court offers Talleyrand a bribe in the hope of his support in this madness. But then it turns out that Talleyrand is a very decent and honest person. He refuses a bribe, proclaims that the monarchy is rotten and outdated, after which he takes off his bishop's hat and transfers into the Third Estate, shouting slogans about freedom, equality and fraternity. And so Talleyrand betrayed his country for the first time. To betray in good time means not to betray, but to foresee. However, when hungry peasants stormed the Bastille, he still had hopes for the prudence of the king. He tried to convince the royal court to gather troops and repel the revolutionaries, but unfortunately, access to the cakes remained unlimited, so no one listened to him. Talleyrand was upset but did not run away. Finally, realizing that France would no longer be the same, he, together with Mirabeau, began promoting the appropriation of church properties. Fortunately, during his clergy career, he managed to make an inventory of all the property of the French church. Also, he participated in the writing of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, and proposed the civil constitution of the clergy that nationalized the church. Notably, he promoted public education in full spirit of the Enlightenment by preparing a 216-page report on public instruction. During his 5 months' tenure in the Estates General, Talleyrand was also involved in drawing up the police regulations of Paris, proposed the suffrage of Jews, supported a ban on the tithes, and invented a method to ensure loans. Great man, isn't he? Oh, and he also begins to sell episcopal mitres and ordain those priests that Pope doesn't want to. He made good money on this, but a year later he was excommunicated by the papal decree. In 1792 he was sent twice unofficially to London to avert war. Still, after an initial British declaration of neutrality during the first campaigns of 1792, his mission ultimately failed. In September of the same year, seeing the beginning of the September massacres, he leaves Paris and returns to London. There, in January of 1793, he learns that the king's head was cut off and realizes that from now on the way to France is closed for him. The main reason for this is his correspondence with King Louis from the spring of 1791, due to which the charge of treason was brought up by decree of the convention. And so Talleyrand officially betrayed his country for the second time. In the March 1794, with the two countries at the brink of war, he was forced to leave Britain. He then went to the neutral country of the United States. During his stay, he supported himself by working as a bank agent involved in commodity trading and real estate speculation. After Nine's Traitor, aka Robespierre, finished badly with his guillotine, he mobilized his friends to lobby in the National Convention and the newly established Directoire for his return. His name was suppressed from the émigré list, and he returned to France on the 25th of September 1796. After gaining attention by giving addresses on the value of the commercial relations with England and of colonization as a way of renewing the nation, he became foreign minister in July 1797. In his new position, he took money from all foreign powers for diplomatic service. A meeting with the Russian ambassador? Well, at 300,000 francs. A peace treaty with Austria? $1 million. A free trade agreement with Naples? $500,000. Of course, this was all hidden behind small agreements and was often presented as payment for speeding up the work of the bureaucratic apparatus. During this period, he earned 13.5 million francs on bribes. For comparison, a French family living in Paris and earning 2,000 francs per year was considered very prosperous. True, bribes didn't work out that way with Americans. A diplomatic delegation sent to Paris in 1797 in order to prevent a possible war was faced with the need to pay a bribe in order to meet with Talleyrand. The Americans were offended by the demands and eventually left France without ever engaging in formal negotiations. Later, the so-called quasi-war began, an undeclared naval war in the Caribbean Sea, which ended only 2 years later with the signing of the Convention of 1800, as a result of which relations were normalized and later the sale of Louisiana was made. Talleyrand was the first of many who saw a possible political career for Napoleon during the Italian campaigns. He wrote many love letters to Napoleon, and 2 eventually became besties. Later, in 1797, Talleyrand was instrumental in assisting with the coup of 18 Fructidor, which ousted 2 moderate members of the Directory in favor of the Jacobins, so that the Royalists did not have a majority in the legislative body and the old monarchical regime could not be restored. And so Talleyrand betrayed his country for the 3rd time. But in 1799, realizing that the popularity and influence of Napoleon were becoming a dangerous weapon, he, together with Napoleon's younger brother, organized another coup, establishing the French consular government. And so Talleyrand betrayed his country for the 4th time.
You do know that you're not normal, though, right?
You're not normal.
Of course, after this, Napoleon appoints Talleyrand as a foreign minister. Despite the dominance of Bonaparte in the political arena of France during these years, Talleyrand is still afraid of the return of Bourbons to the French throne and therefore persuades Napoleon to kidnap and shoot the Duke of Enghien. A completely harmless guy, but alas, a representative of the younger branch of Bourbons whom relatives could use as the banner to return the throne. Talleyrand was an integral player in the German mediatization. While the Treaty of Campo Formio of 1797 had on paper stripped German princes of their lands beyond the left bank of the Rhine, it was not enforced until the Treaty of Luneville in 1801. As the French annexed these lands, leaders believed that rulers of states such as Baden, Bavaria, Württemberg, Prussia, Hesse and Nassau, who lost territories on the left bank, should receive new territories on the right bank through the secularization of ecclesiastical principalities. Many of these rulers gave out bribes in order to secure new lands, and Talleyrand and some of his associates amassed about 10 million francs in the process. By the way, this was the first blow in the destruction of the Holy Roman Empire. In May 1804, Napoleon bestowed upon Talleyrand the title of Grand Chamberlain of the Empire, with almost 500,000 francs a year. In 1806, he was made sovereign Prince of Benevento, a former papal fief in southern Italy. At the Congress of Erfurt in September to October 1808, Talleyrand secretly consulted Tsar Alexander. Moreover, he incited the Tsar to start a new war with Bonaparte, who by this time was constantly dreaming about new conquests and was busy with dealing with Spanish rebels. Napoleon had expected Talleyrand to help convince the Tsar to accept his proposals and never discovered that Talleyrand was working at cross purposes. Talleyrand believed Napoleon would eventually destroy the country he had worked to build across multiple rulers. He loved France as a country, not as an empire, at least this is how he writes in his memoirs, which frankly, are difficult to believe given the personality. 1809, Napoleon is busy in Spain when he suddenly learns that literally all of Europe is arming against him. Using a police and common sense, he figures out that Talleyrand probably had something to do with it. This caused the famous dressing down of Talleyrand in front of Napoleon's marshals, during which Napoleon famously claimed that he could break him like a glass, but it's not worth the trouble, and added with a scatological tone that Talleyrand was shit in a silk stocking, to which the minister coldly retorted once Napoleon had left. Pity that so great a man should have been so badly brought up. 1814. The troops of the anti-Napoleonic coalition enters Paris. Napoleon orders all important statesmen to leave the city, but Talleyrand had changed sides long ago. He doesn't obey him and remains in the capital, and in a very clever way. He persuades one of the police officials that he will try to leave the city, but will be detained by the fighters of the National Guard. In such a cunning way, he betrayed his state for the 5th time. Very soon, Tsar Alexander with his troops enters Paris, and Talleyrand invites him for tea. There, he receives a check for all the secrets that he has sold to him during the last years, and also convinces the Tsar that the best future for France and all of Europe will be the restoration of the monarchy led by the Bourbon dynasty. The Russian Tsar, tired of endless trips across Europe, agrees and dumps all the work on Talleyrand. And on the 1st of April 1814, Talleyrand leading the French Senate in establishing a provisional government in Paris, of which he was elected president. What a surprise. On 2nd April, the Senate officially deposed Napoleon with the Acte de l'État de l'Empereur, and by 11 April it had approved the Treaty of Fontainebleau and adopted a new constitution to re-establish the Bourbon monarchy. Congress of Vienna. Initially, the representatives of the 4 victorious powers hoped to exclude the French from serious participation in the negotiations, but Talleyrand skillfully managed to insert himself into her inner councils in the first weeks of negotiations. He allied himself to a committee of 8 lesser powers, including Spain, Sweden and Portugal, to control the negotiations. Once Talleyrand was able to use this committee to make himself a part of the inner negotiations, he then left it, once again abandoning his allies. How did he manage to do this? Well, the most dangerous topic at the Congress of Vienna was the Polish-Saxon crisis. Russia wanted most of Poland and Prussia wanted all of Saxony. Austria was fearful this would make Russia much too powerful, a view which was supported by Britain. The result was a deadlock for which Talleyrand proposed a solution. Admit France to the inner circle, and France would support Austria and Britain. The 3 nations signed a secret treaty on the 3rd of January 1815, agreeing to go to war against Russia and Prussia, if necessary, to prevent the Russo-Prussian plan from coming to fruition. When the Tsar heard of the secret treaty, he agreed to a compromise that satisfied all parties on the 24th of October 1815. As a result of entering inner council, Talleyrand outplayed and quarreled all the recent allies and managed to preserve all France's de jure territories. And everything seemed to be going well, but one day...
You've got mail!
Napoleon fled from Elba.
What? Oh, fuck.
Napoleon's return to France in 1815 and his subsequent defeat the 100 Days was a reverse for the diplomatic victories of Talleyrand, who remained in Vienna the whole time. The second peace settlement was markedly less lenient, and it was fortunate for France that the business of the Congress had been concluded. Having been appointed foreign minister and president of the Council on the 9th of July 1815, Talleyrand resigned in September of that year over his objections to the second treaty. After 14 years, in December 1829, Talleyrand founded the foundation of the national newspaper. It quickly became the mouthpiece of the Orleanist cause, gaining popularity among the French liberal bourgeoisie, which was according to Talleyrand's plans, because by this time he had managed to get close to the House of Orleans and later organized the ascension to the throne of King Louis-Philippe after the July Revolution of 1830. And so technically Talleyrand betrayed his country for the 6th time. Talleyrand reluctantly agreed to become ambassador to the United Kingdom, a post he held from 1830 to 1834. In this role he strove to reinforce the legitimacy of Louis-Philippe's regime. He played a vital role in the London Conference of 1830, rebacking a partition plan developed by his son Charles de Flahaut, and helping bring Leopold Saxe-Coburg to the throne of the newly independent Kingdom of Belgium. In April 1834, he crowned his diplomatic career by signing the treaty which brought together as allies France, Great Britain, Spain and Portugal. After resigning from his position as ambassador in London, Talleyrand stopped playing an active role in French politics. He split his time between Chateau de Valenquet and St. Florentin, where he hosted frequent banquets and played whist with his visitors. His physical health began to steadily deteriorate, and he began to suffer from bouts of recurring depression, which were caused by his concern of his legacy and the development of the Napoleonic myth. To that end, he ordered that his autobiography, The Memoirs, be published 30 years after his death. He also sought to gain the friendship of people he believed would shape public opinion in the future, including Honoré de Balzac, Lady Granville and Alphonse de Lamartine. During the last years of his life, Talleyrand began planning his reconciliation with the Catholic Church. On the 16th of May 1838, he signed a retraction of his errors toward the Church and a letter of submission to Pope Gregory XVI. He died the following day at 3:55 p.m. at St. Florentin.